my screen. We're talking today about how to think like a developmental editor. And I'm a dev editor, which is how we refer to it in short form. And I get asked a lot exactly what dev editing is and how can someone do it for themselves. And so hence this presentation that Brian invited me to present. So I thought a good place to start is to actually think about why we're even talking about this. It used to be that dev editing was something that was done by your publisher. It happened behind the scenes. You didn't really need to know anything about it as an author, but those days are kind of gone. And why those days are gone is that once upon a time, before 2008, this is kind of the way a manuscript would go through the system to become a book, right? You write the manuscript, you give it to your agent, the agent takes it to an editor that they know, an acquisitions editor, the editor buys it, and after the editor buys it, it goes through all this editorial development. And that's broken into stages. And the first, and in some ways the most important stage, is what's called the dev, or the developmental edit. Then you go through line editing, copy editing, proofreading, and then it goes on through this whole long list here, as you can see. But what happened was that in 2008, which was a great recession for those who can't remember, there was this huge contraction in the publishing industry, and about a third of the editorial spots were lost, and they haven't been replaced. The number of books that we sell every year has gone back to where it was before. It's actually there are actually more titles now than there were in 2008 every year, but the number of staff that are around to do it is about 1/3 less. So what this has meant is that there's just been this huge shift in the way that things are happening. So nowadays in 2022, what is expected is that you as an author are going to have your manuscript really, really tight, really finished before you even present it to an agent. And that agent is going to work with you and go through another round again and tighten it up even more before it's ever presented at acquisitions. And after acquisition, just so in case you think that this whole thing's finished, there's going to be another round. So you just brace yourself for that. But what it means is that at the acquisition stage, when the editor is deciding whether or not to buy it, they're expecting it to come in at a much higher level so that they have a lot less work to do, because they simply don't have the time to do that work, because they are actually working on more books per editor now than they were before. So you really have to raise your game now to kind of get over that hurdle, and you do it, and it goes downstream as well, because agents now are so busy with different authors who want to get published. I think that the statistic is 1 in every 4 Americans thinks they have a book. So imagine all these books coming to not that many agents, and agents also want everything a very high standard before they kind of dig into it, right? So what is this big first step called dev editing? It gets confused a lot. There are a lot of authors out there who just kind of don't know what it is. And so one of the most tragic things is I'll hear someone say to me, "Oh, I got my book edited. I paid $400 and it's been totally edited." And it's like, well, no, we paid $400. That was not a dev edit. That was probably a copy edit where you're just going through and making sure that everything is correct. Dev editing, as you can see from this chart, is what happens up front. It's like a big edit on the big high level, big picture things, where you're asking questions like, is the book working? Are key elements in the book working? Is every single chapter working? And I'm going to say beyond chapter scene, is every scene working? And also, what is the author bringing into this? What are the author's foibles? What are they doing that they don't even realize they're doing? Those little patterns that get annoying to the reader that the author can't see. All that gets taken care of in dev editing, right? It's basically, do we have a book and can we make it a good book? And then after that, you go into another round of editing called line editing, where now you're looking more closely, kind of further down the tree at things like style and language and efficiency and grammar and how well the book is written. So the first, dev editing, how good is the book? Can we make it a good book? Then line editing, how well is the book written? Then copy editing is Is it all done correctly? Is it all like buckled down and pinned down? So you're still looking at language and grammar, but you're looking at spelling and punctuation and consistency. And then proofreading is just to make sure that as this manuscript gets handled by so many hands going through, that you haven't introduced spelling mistakes and punctuation errors, and there are a lot of consistency issues that need to get mopped up, and that happens at the end stage. So today we're talking about dev editing. We're talking about what questions should you ask yourself to see whether your book is working, and what can you do as an author at home to make sure that your work is of the highest standard possible before you even go out there. All right. The name of the game is to be publishable, because you give the editor or the agent less opportunity to reject your work. So is the book working? The first question to ask is there sufficient interest? You think it's really interesting because you wrote the book, but is it interesting to the reader? So to be interesting to the reader, you need a sense of conflict, and you need very high stakes, okay? Something has to be gained or lost according to how this book turns out. So that really answers the question, like, why should we care? Right off the bat, you have to convince your reader that they should care, because the stakes are high, because the conflict is high. Then you want a lot of tension and suspense in your book. You don't want it to be kind of like, oh, just placid and leisurely, because our reading age nowadays, I mean, there used to be very, very like low tension books that used to get read, but now you're competing against, TV and Game of Thrones and everything else. So tension levels have to be much higher nowadays. And basically, the tension and the suspense is what gives your reader the reason to turn the page. And you need to keep them turning the page if you want to sell the book. Then there's something called intrigue, and this can happen in different ways. It's either there's some element of mystery in the book that makes it intriguing, like a dead body right from the beginning. It could be, a world that we want to see more of, right? Like in speculative fiction or in historical fiction, a world that we want to live in for a short amount of time. Now, or it can be just characters who are so compelling that we need to know what happens with their lives. So it can be different ways of getting intrigue in a book, but basically you have to ask yourself, what's going to snag or haunt my reader? What's going to make it so that when the reader puts the book down at the end of the day and goes to sleep because she has to go to work tomorrow, that's going to be with her all through the day, so that she can't help but come back and pick up your book again and read further. Okay, so how do you make it intriguing? And then there's this other part in the dev editor's head, which is that all of us work in publishing. Publishing is an industry. It's there to make money. So what is the market appeal? Where are we going to sell this book? Is this book saleable? And we'll come to that later at the end of the course, but you have to always think, like, is it topical, for example? Is it something that people are talking about? Does it belong to a genre that's growing? Right now, speculative fiction is doing really well. So if you have a speculative fiction book, your chances are better than if you're writing 700-page epics, not selling so well right now. Your chances of getting that published are low. So you have to think about that. So are the key elements working is the next step down, right? After we've answered those big questions. As you can see, a dev edit can take weeks and weeks of work for an editor. It's a very large undertaking. But once you have all those big things answered, then you start looking at the elements. And there are many of them. There are things like the plot, the pace, your tension, your structure, your characters, the world and setting, the point of view, the audience that you're talking to, the voice that you're using to talk to the audience, and even something apparently as mundane as the tense. Are you going to set this in present tense? Are you going to set this in past tense? All of those things affect how well a book works, and the dev editor takes a look at all of those. We don't have time to even mention all of those, so we're going to focus on 5, okay? The 5 big ones: plot, pace, tension, characters, and your world and setting. We're going to have a little look at those today. So let's start with plot. When you're trying to consider the plot of your book, you obviously wrote it, you know what the story is, and it feels to you as if that's the only way the story should be told. I'm also an author of 21 books, so I know this. You think that that is the only way the story can be told. What you need is some objectivity. You need some distance. And the easiest way to do that for yourself is to use an outside rubric or an outside, they call them beat sheets, but some kind of structure that you can measure your own plot against to see whether it's working in the way that we expect books to work, which unfortunately, there are exceptions, but they are not, they're kind of like variations of the rule. They don't change the rule, right? Right now, a very, very popular beat sheet that a lot of people are using is something called Say the Cat Writes a Novel. You can go out and find it online. You can buy the book. There are different ways of accessing it. It's written by Jessica Brody, came out in 2018. It's still very popular today. And it takes you through like 15 beats. Plus, she gives you all these examples of all the great works, both contemporary and classical, that follow these beats, and how they kind of might shift a little bit, a couple percentage points either way, but basically they're going to follow this format. So I'm putting that up front because everybody asks about that, because right now that's what a lot of people are using. But I'm actually a little bit more old-fashioned than that. I use something called the Freytag pyramid, and the Freytag pyramid was first proposed by Gustav Freytag, and I believe it was in the 1870s. I think it was the 1870s. So it's been around for a very long time, and it breaks the book much more simply than 15 beats, simply into there's going to be a period of exposition where you're kind of setting the scene. Then you're going to have an inciting incident that kicks the whole thing off. Then you have this big rising action that brings you to the climax of the book. Rising action, this is like the y-axis is actually tension, where the tension mounts and mounts and mounts in your book to the climax. And then after the climax, there's a falling action, meaning everything kind of like resolves, and you get that big sigh of relief. In Snow White, princes come and kiss Snow White, and then you get all the happy scenes with the dwarves before they go riding off into the sunset, basically. And then the denouement is the happily ever after. Okay, that is Freytag's pyramid, basically. Nowadays, there's something called the modern Freytag pyramid, and you'll see that there are a couple of bit more bumps in the curve. The inciting incident where life changes is much earlier now. Because of that impatience that I was talking about on this part of readers, you tend to start when life changes. So ask yourself, when you go back and look at your work, are you really starting when life is changing for your characters? Then you have the rising action. What's new to the modern Freytag is you have a couple of beats of reversals where you actually think that the hero or heroine's going to succeed, but then you drop them off a cliff, and then they have to climb up again. You drop them off a cliff before you come to the big climax. And then you have the falling action. And notice that the denouement is now very, very short. You don't hang around to see the happily ever after. The reader knows how it's going to end. That's it. They're out. Okay? So that's the modern Freytag pyramid. And I like this. I use this. I find it very easy to use, but very powerful. And there's another way of expressing it by John Dufresne. He wrote this, 20 years ago now, but he just encapsulated it as get your heroine up a tree, throw rocks at her, throw bigger rocks at her, get her down. That's your job. Okay? So that where you'll see the modern Freytag, those reversals I was talking about, those are the rocks in Dufresne's model. So what you need to do basically is find something that you like and that you want to work with, and put your plot up against that and see whether it measures up and it works, because it'll give you a little bit of objectivity. The second place where a lot of authors fall down is in pace. And so from this point on, I'm just going to give you little snippets of real edits so you can start to hear an editor's voice in this. So there's this concept called the magnet, right? So I'm writing to one of my clients at this point. I was once given this analogy and have since found it very useful. The end of a book should be like a powerful magnet. From the first page, you must be able to feel its pull, and as you get closer to the end, so its presence should be more and more palpable, accelerating everything towards itself. So obviously this client wasn't doing that, and I kind of tell them when and why, what, for example, this is about a battle, but on the eve of the battle, they're kind of like joking around and joshing with each other. It's too leisurely. It's like, and it also like drops your tension, because if they're having a good time before the battle and they're not worried about the battle, we're not going to worry about the battle. So it cuts your tension. So this kind of jumps me forward to the next scene, the next section. You always need to keep an eye out on what is happening to the tension in your book and make sure that you're not cutting it, right? You need it all the way through. A very easy way to add some tension is with this idea of a clock, that something's ticking, like there's a time limit for everything. And Alfred Hitchcock was what he was actually reading about, speaking about movies, but he said that if you have a bomb underneath the desk, and nobody knows in the room that the bomb is there, but the reader knows that the bomb is there, now you've got all this tension, because the reader wants to tell everyone, hey, there's a bomb in the room, you got to get out. So you know this if you've ever watched a horror movie where the reader knows something, the viewer knows something that those stupid people running around in the dark do not know. Right? That monster is around the corner. Hurry up. That is how you get some tension. So that's kind of called the clock. The magnet and the clock are two elements that kind of drag you through the book. And as dev editors, we always look to see if there's a magnet and a clock. So world and setting, something else to pay attention to. One thing is that your world rules will go anywhere with you as long as your rules and your logic are consistent. Consistency is very, very important because it makes us believe the world you're creating. So again, a snippet that I gave to a client, she's writing speculative fiction, makes it really even more important because it's world building, it's not just setting. And there's inconsistencies there. So what the humans know or don't know was inconsistent. They could name a whole list of animals, mule deer, bears, cougars, rats, but they couldn't name a large cawing blackbird like a raven or a crow. That's kind of odd. They knew all these things, like how to knit, how to use a sewing machine, but they couldn't drive like a push button, very clearly labeled automatic car. So things like that, as soon as there's an inconsistency, you wake your reader up, and you don't want to do that. You want to leave your reader in the dream that you're creating. Also, there's an opportunity in worlds and settings in that they kind of communicate. They're sometimes called the third character or an extra character. They're telling you something about the story. So in this example that I'm giving you, we're going in with this girl into her home, but the author has missed the chance to tell us something about her characters by showing us that home in more detail. So we know that the mother is a healthcare worker, but is she a struggling single mom nurse? Is she like a very powerful anesthesiologist? You're going to see that in the home, like what kind of house they live in, how big is it, how expensive is everything. And her brother, who has gone missing, we would see his personality on his bookshelves. What is he reading? What posters does he have on the walls? These are the details that you really need to work on setting so that your setting is communicating on your behalf at all times. Okay? And then we come to the big one, characters. There's a saying out there that you can have a book without plot, but you cannot have a book without characters. So think to yourself, are your characterizations justified? By which I mean, what you're telling us about your characters, are you actually showing that to us as well? So in this example, I've been told by my client that, Patrick is a very, very clever man. But while I'm reading the book, I'm not seeing anything that he's doing that makes him very clever. So if he's going to be very clever, we need to see them doing clever things. We need to see them doing things smart people do. Like there's talk about a plan. I want to see that plan. I want to see the details of the plan. I want to think, oh my God, that's such a smart plan. I want him to notice things that other people don't notice. That's what smart people do. Or they get to a conclusion faster than other people around them. I want to see some of these things. So make sure you just don't tell us what your characters are like. A lot of authors just sit there and describe their characters. Not good enough. I want to see them walking around and moving. And when they move and act, that's when I'll make my own judgment as a reader about them. And that's important. And then that behavior that you see it has to be consistent with the emotions that you're trying to express as well. So, for example, in this example, Patrick, we're told, loves Lucy for her intellect, never ever treats her like a smart woman. So I'm not going to believe it. You can tell me all you want as the author. I need to see it in action. I need to see Lucy behave like a smart woman. I need to see Patrick behave like a man in love with a smart woman. Okay? And then the third one, which is difficult, is do they deserve our company? You're asking the reader now to stay with your protagonist for like the week, say, it takes to read the book. Do they really deserve our company? They can be imperfect people as long as we have some hope for them that there's something human or good in their character. So in this example, I had a big problem with this character, Billy, and she just got worse. You know, in the beginning, I was like, oh, well, maybe she's going to learn something, and so there's some like my good things about her, so I can stay with her. But if your character just keeps getting worse, at a certain point, the reader's going to go and find better company. So then, very quickly, you want to have a look at whether all your scenes are working. So on the scene level, you ask yourself, is the scene even necessary? Does it advance plot? Does it deepen character? Does it ask a question that your reader wants answered, so your reader will keep reading? Does it pack a punch? Does it leave us hanging? Is it efficient? Is it tight? Is it in the right position? All of these things you ask as you go through and look at the book scene by scene. And the only way to analyze and I do this actually with Post-it notes. A lot of people just do it with a spreadsheet. Is that you make a list of all your chapters, or in this case, all your scenes, and for each you know what you learn about character, how it advances the plot, and what question is raised. Okay, so this is the beginning of a book that I was working on, and this is my I use a big blank wall. This is the beginning of my scene analysis, and you'll see here that blue. I don't know if you guys can see my cursor, but that blue post-it right in the middle in the top row, that showed me that there was a scene that was missing there. And then where further to the left, you see that I have like a couple of post-it notes missing. That tells me that's a weak scene. It's not, it's not doing those things that I want every single scene to do. So that gives me a very quick visual as to where the work needs to happen. So sit down, takes a long time, but analyze your book scene by scene. And then also look out for your own foibles. So what are those things? Those are author's conveniences, your uncertainties, are you rescuing your characters, and what are your pet words and phrases, okay? So conveniences, things like coincidences. Your heroine has to get out of a locked room and then, hey, presto, there's a key on the top shelf. Don't do that. The rule is that you can use a convenience or a coincidence to get your character into trouble, but never to get your character out of trouble. Okay, the reader resents it. They think that you're cheating. Uncertainties are interesting. It's like all of a sudden when I'm editing, I'll see that the hero is starting to act a little evasively or a little ambiguously, and you know that it's not because the hero doesn't know what they feel. It's because the author doesn't know what the hero feels at that moment. So you need to know at all times, even when the protagonist is confused and does not know, the author must always know what the protagonist is feeling at that moment, okay, even if it's not on the page. All this unseen knowledge, it's called the iceberg phenomenon, will make itself felt somehow. It's weird, but trust me. Rescuing characters, very, very common, because we all want to take care of our characters. So it's something like if your heroine has just fallen off the cliff, and someone's yelling, are you okay? Immediately the answer is, yes, I'm fine. No, that's rescued your character. What you need to do is make us worry. Leave them in danger. The more you worry your reader, the more the reader bonds to your character. So you want to, every moment you can, make us worry about your character. Okay? And then look out for pet words and phrases. And those are, we all have them. They're different for each of us, but they're the words like just, or quirked, or weird, or squeal. These are from clients of mine. Just is mine, by the way. I use just everywhere. And so because I've been writing long enough to know what some of my pets are, and if you're in a writer's group, they're very helpful at telling you. Just ask your people who are reading your work, what are my pet phrases? Then you do a little. I just had a class last week. I asked them to do this, to do a find and replace, like a search. how many justs point out. And in my document was like 132 justs or something. So you know that those are not all necessary. Go back one by one, have a look at them, take them out where you can. Okay. Same with cliched phrases and gestures. You know, the widening eyes, the smiles, the shrugs, the raising the eyebrow, all of this stuff that everybody uses. Every writer in that room uses that. Think, what would Helen Mirren do? She doesn't use like this cliche gesture. She's such a good actress that she'll do something else, like some other small gesture that will communicate the same thing. That's what you want your characters to do. You want to be able to observe not the first thing that comes to mind, which is the eyes widening in surprise, but what else your character does. It makes a much more satisfying read for the reader. So that, in a nutshell, going at 1,000,000 miles an hour, we only have 15 minutes left, is half an hour left, is what dev editing does. Okay, and I'll answer questions as we go through. But let's now shift gears to, okay, now you've got this like concept of it. How do you get started? Well, there's some things that you can do for yourself. You've already started by being in this session. You can learn the craft of dev editing. It is a craft. You know, editing is a craft just as writing is a craft. You're going to do it in person at classes and conferences like this. But there's also a lot that's available to you through the media. So Save the Cat, we've mentioned. There are also the great courses online. If you guys don't know about that, it's university level courses that you can take at your own speed. Masterclass also does that. Masterclass is some of the top writers and editors on the planet talking about how they approach their work, so you can learn from them too. So there are lots and lots of options. And then I haven't even put in here books, right? Because there's so many how-to books. I've got a stack of how-to books just out of sight of this camera that's at least 18 to 24 inches high. So lots and lots out there that will help you. The important thing is to apply it. To apply it, you have to read and analyze. So a lot of writers make the mistake of, like, for example, when you go into workshopping in a conference, a lot of times the authors will turn up when they're being read, and then they'll like go and get coffee somewhere else when somebody else is being read. That's a mistake. You learn so much by reading and analyzing somebody else's work. You're shortchanging yourself. You know, as a working editor who's also an author, it's amazing. Every time I edit a book, I'm learning something or it's helping me see the book that I'm writing. So apply it, read and analyze, write and edit hand in hand, the two things. Okay, always like have the editing hat as well as the writer's hat. They're two different hats. And rope in other writers to help you. Either join or form a writer's group. Writer's groups are really useful because you get to practice the editing, and at the same time, when everybody else is practicing their editing on you, you get the benefit of all the feedback. And it really, really sharpens that ability to see your work. So a couple of things are important. It's like, if it's facilitated by a professional, that's even better because, you know, they have experience and they give it some structure. But if you can't find one, and by the way, you might not know this, but every single author out there, or not maybe every single, but a lot of authors out there will be facilitating a writer's group. So if you find someone that you like their opinion, you think that they would be really good for your work, just ask them. Say, do you have a writer's group? Do you lead a writer's group? Is there any way I can join it? Can I get on the wait list? Because usually they're full. But that's the way to get started. Or if you encounter people that you think are valuable, ask them to join your group, start a group, and put a group together. Important is to meet regularly and to review regularly and to have a structure so that you know what you're reviewing against. Everybody's doing the same kind of analysis. Okay. Then you also want to cultivate these things called beta readers. And beta readers are the people who are going to read your work from the beginning to the end. That's a big commitment. They're going to read your entire manuscript before it goes to anybody, before it goes to an editor or publisher, anyone. And you usually cultivate that from people that you meet at conferences, in writers' groups, that kind of thing. But what you're looking for is a good analytical reader. That's the most important thing. Someone whose reading taste you like. So they're already predisposed to a book like the book you want to be writing. Okay, someone who reads in your genre so that they know what the genre rules are, they know what to expect, they know what your book should sound like, basically. And also, it's usually a writer, because writers can discuss craft. You know, other people kind of don't really know the words to use with you to tell you what you're doing right or wrong. So usually a writer, but not always. Not always. I've had beta readers in the past who are just readers. Like, there are a lot of editors who don't write, for example, but they know the language and they know how to analyze writing. Usually my rule is no family under any circumstances, because it just gets, you know, if they say something good, you don't know why they're saying that good thing. They say something not so nice, you also don't know what's motivating that. It just gets murky. So my whole family are writers, but we don't do each other's work for that reason. I know that some people have great success with it, so good luck. Anyway, then the other thing is that you can turn to professionals. You can get a full dev edit. It's a service that you have to pay for. It's an expensive service because it takes such a long time. But the Right Life, for example, it's a very useful website to go to, actually, for any kind of thing about editing. They actually post the results of a survey every year for how much editing is costing, all the different kinds. So you'll have dev editing, copy editing, and proofreading here broken down, as you can see. And you can see that for a 80 to 100,000 word book, which is really kind of where you should be in the 80 to 90,000 range at the moment. It's going to cost you something like $6,000 or $7,000. Okay. But if that's too expensive, don't forget that you can also buy partial edits. And this is often given as part of a workshop or consultations at conferences like this. Those rates, by the way, Brian mentioned, if you want to sign up for a pitch, this is the time to do it. They're so heavily subsidized by conferences. You really, really need to make use of this opportunity while you have it. I have so many people who come back to me shocked because they're like, oh, you know, I got however many minutes of your time for this amount of money, and now I come through your website. You're so much more expensive. Well, it's true, because I'm doing this for Brian. So make sure that you make use of this opportunity. It's sometimes given away as incentives, in fact, like Writer's Digest. Every time you have an online webinar from an agent or from an editor, usually that agent and editor will also give you like a few pages of a read. So look out for these opportunities. They are around you. You can get some professional feedback for actually quite a small amount of money. And a lot of editors can be contracted to do less than a full read. So they might do your first chapter plus your synopsis, or maybe your first 3 chapters, or maybe just like your query package, but something smaller than the full read, which I realize $6,000 to $7,000 is more than most people can afford. The other thing is that a lot of these editors charge by the hour. We just want to buy like a couple of hours of time, either in person on Zoom or at a conference, so that you can actually get their opinion. Usually there's not enough time to read a lot of your work, so it's, you know, you tell me what your problem is and I'll tell you how I would go around fixing it, that kind of thing. And then the last thing is that there are writers groups out there and long form workshops, like there are writing workshops that go over the course of a year. And so obviously when you enter workshops like that, you're getting a professional, the teacher, the instructor, looking at your work periodically over a long period. So they usually get to see a lot of the work. In my writers group, you know, it's because they've been ongoing now for 7 or 8 years. We've actually, some of my authors have had 3 books coming out, and I've read every single word in all 3 books. So look for opportunities like that. And so if you see this all assembled, you'll see that there are many, many ways in which you can help yourself. There are also many ways in which you can take advantage of your peers, and you can also obviously reach out to professionals. There's lots that you can do, in other words, to get a good dev edit. My big tip is that in this whole scheme of things, prioritize the developmental edit. I often get people asking me, well, but they're going to edit it one more time again anyway, or maybe even twice. The agent wants and then the editor wants. Then maybe all I need to do is kind of get kind of good enough. The problem with that is it's so competitive. I can't even tell you how competitive it is. That if you're kind of maybe good enough, if you work on it, you'll help me get it to where it's great. You get someone who just that same day has gotten a manuscript that's just that little bit better. Which manuscript are they going to go with? The one that looks like it's going to take more work, or the one that takes less work? Most of my editor friends, in the big publishing houses, they don't even do their reading during work hours because they have so many meetings to go to. This is the stuff that they have to take home to get done. Nobody has any time. If you understand that part of the industry, you'll understand why it's so important to get the dev editing taken care of as far as you can take it. There's going to be another round, but so that you know that you're really putting your best foot forward before you go down the trail of sending something out to an agent that's not quite good yet, and then you shot your chance with that agent. The agent can't sell it to an editor, and it's going to take you years to realize that it's a dead end, and then you're going to come back and edit the book, and then 7 years later you're going to sell it. So just put your best foot forward from the beginning. Learn how to dev edit. Learn how to think like a dev editor. Do the best that you can for yourself. Use your peers. Use professionals if you can afford it, and then step out there and be patient. If you're not a patient person, publishing is not for you.